This is Swanage. It's a pretty little seaside town in Dorset. It's on the eastern edge of the Jurassic coast and is within easy travelling distance of some of the most famous landmarks in the country. Durdle Door, Manor Beach, Old Harry Rocks, Corfe Castle and many more besides. I spent much of my childhood summer holidays playing on this beach, swimming in that sea, poking around in rock pools and generally doing exactly the sort of thing that children have been doing at the seaside for hundreds of years. Exactly the sort of thing that a group of children were doing here on Friday the 13th of May 1955 when 5 of them were killed in a tragic incident that could and should have been prevented. In 1940, during the Second World War, the British government was convinced that a major land invasion was imminent. The British High Command had got wind of Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's plan to land 160,000 German soldiers on beaches across southern England. The Home Guard was formed. Anti-tank fortifications were laid across the south of England. Pillboxes appeared on beaches along navigable rivers and at strategic locations around the country. And almost every beach facing the English Channel was turned into a minefield. Somewhere in the region of 350,000 B-type C mines, the B stands for beach, were placed in the sand around the high tide mark on British beaches, creating 1,997 minefields. Containing over 25 pounds of amatol, a high explosive mixture of TNT and ammonium nitrate, these mines were powerful enough to disable a tank, but were sensitive enough to be triggered by a single person's weight. The problem was, they were laid in a hurry, and while attempts were made to record the exact location of each mine, these weren't always accurate, and no one had taken into consideration the fact that due to the action of the sea, the sand had a tendency to move. A soldier in the 125th Infantry Brigade remarked in 1940, "The minefields are marked well on maps, but of course they're moved by the action of the sea." It rapidly became clear that the mines were not staying where they'd been put, so a task force was created to remove the individual mines and relay new mines that were wired together to make it easier to retrieve later. Only this was not a simple task. It took 11 months to clear just the beaches around Swanage in Kent. 3,500 mines were lifted and replaced with 7,000 new mines, all wired together in 4 rows. It cost 2 engineers their lives. This was something that tragically would become all too common. In 1943, when the threat of invasion had passed, a concerted effort was made to clear the mines. The work continued into the 50s and cost the lives of somewhere in the region of 500 engineers. Each beach was issued with a clearance certificate once the work had been done. Here in Swanage, clearance operations were carried out in 1947, again in 1949, and for a third time in 1950. The officer in charge of the final clearance refused to issue a certificate. He was overruled by his superiors, and a certificate was issued anyway. According to the official records, 117 mines were laid on this beach, and over the 3 clearance efforts, only 5 were recovered. There's some evidence of craters where 54 mines had been, and it was assumed that these had been detonated by animals or by the shockwave from another mine exploding. The remaining 58 were completely unaccounted for. So when in 1955 a group of children found what they believed to be an old tin wedged in between rocks here on the beach, no one should have been surprised by what happened. 2 boys were walking away, leaving 5 throwing stones at the tin, trying to open it, when it exploded. The 2 walking away were thrown into the sea and survived. 5 were killed instantly. 4 bodies were recovered, and the 5th was completely vaporized by the blast, leaving only his shoes on the sand. That still leaves 57 landmines on this beach alone that have never been found. Of the two boys who survived, one, Robert Key, went on to become an MP and even spoke in Parliament about the fact that there were hundreds or possibly thousands of unrecovered landmines on British beaches. And yet we have the technology and the ability to find and remove them. This was over a decade ago. Nothing has yet been done. Now, the constant exposure to seawater has undoubtedly corroded the metal of the mines, and the likelihood is that the mechanical detonation mechanism is no longer viable. But the amatol explosive itself was often coated with bitumen to prevent water from rendering it less effective. And the fuse itself, usually a combination of mercury fulminate and tetrol, was also sealed. Perhaps the unaccounted mines have been washed out to sea. Perhaps they've simply sunk into the sand and will never be found. But even now, landmines from World War II are still being found on British beaches. In January of 2021, Storm Christoph exposed 3 mines on a single beach in South Devon. The fact is that any beach on the south or east coast of England that looks like an amphibious vehicle could land there undoubtedly was, and probably still is, a literal minefield.